Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great. So before I dive into the actual book discussion, when I was doing some research this week, I saw that beginning this month, Hulu is making an 8-part series, a mini-series of the Dopesick book, starring Michael Keaton. So that's
cool.
Exciting because when I was reading it, the whole time I kept thinking this would be a really good documentary because there's so many different stories intertwined and characters and places that if you could, I'm a visual learner anyway. If I could see it, I think it would all give me the big picture a little better. So I will definitely be looking out for when Hulu releases that. I think that'll be really good. I don't have Hulu, but I'm probably going to have to get a trial just to see that. And then I kept also, when I had first downloaded the audiobook and I started listening to it that way, the first few chapters, but I was picturing the author from her voice very different than how I think she really is in real life. I think her voice reminded me of somebody else I know. So I started reading it and I liked it that way a lot better. But just a little background on her, I think it helps to know a little bit about where the author's coming from. She grew up in Urbana, Ohio. She received her bachelor's degree in journalism from Bowling Green University in Ohio and a master's degree in creative writing from Hollins University. As we could tell from the book, she worked as a reporter for the Roanoke Times from 1989 to 2014. And she's authored several best-selling books. So she was in Roanoke for 3 decades, and she's won many awards, including the Nieman Fellowship for Journalism at Harvard. And I do like how she really put herself into a lot of the stories there in the book. Did you guys have any thoughts about the author as you were reading? Or do any research about her?
I didn't research her, but I thought she really did put herself into it and got into the family dynamics of, what they would went through.
Yeah, I think so too. I think she did a good job empathizing with the family. 3 of her other books that I thought might be some you all would be interested as well if you liked this one. Factory Man, which is about how one furniture maker battled offshoring. True Vine, which is about 2 brothers, a kidnapping, and a mother's quest. It's a true story of the Jim Crow South. That one looked really good. And then Finding Tess, which I think intertwines with this story on Dopesick. So those looked good as well. So here's a quick summary. Let me minimize so I can read this to you all. I hate to read to you, but Dopesick tells the full story of the opioid crisis, from the boardroom to the courtroom and into the living rooms of Americans struggling to save themselves and their families. From the labs and marketing departments of Big Pharma to local doctors' offices, wealthy suburbs to distressed small communities in central Appalachia, from distant cities to once idyllic farm towns, the spread of opioid addiction follows a torturous trajectory that illustrates how the crisis has persisted for so long and become so firmly entrenched. Beginning with a single dealer who lands in a small Virginia town and sets about turning high school football stars into heroin overdose statistics, Macy sets out to answer a grieving mother's question, why her only son died, and comes away with a gripping, unputdownable story of greed and need. I thought that did a good job summarizing it as well. And I was really interested in the timeline of the story because she kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. It's not a chronological book in any means. And there's one part where she goes back even very far back into the beginnings of opium addiction and when heroin started. And so I thought it was interesting to me just to put down some of the dates that she mentioned and how far back really the roots of this issue goes, even to the Civil War, when opium addiction was very high in the country. And then when heroin was developed in 1899, well, it was put in cough drops and baby soothing syrups. It was really looked at, it was used medicinally as it was developed for, but then in 1914 became severely restricted. And there was a phase there where it reclassified addicts as criminals instead of patients who were needing medical treatment. So, I always think about, when I think of history, how it just cycles back around sometimes, because that's not too different than where we're still at trying to figure out how to classify addicts. They're still in the criminal system, but they're also treatment patients as well. So I'm not going to read all of this to you, and I am going to email this to you after our discussion. But for me, it just helped to kind of put it down chronologically so we could see how it evolved a little bit. Was there any point in time that really stood out to you all as far as a time that you think was a big turning point in the history of addiction?
I was thinking that the 1996, with the introduction of OxyContin, really changed everything. It became such a predicament for every single community because of that.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely agree.
I was really surprised to find out that it went back as far as into the 90s. I don't think of it as being a drug that was available at that time. For some reason, I just always put it in the 2000s. And maybe that's just because we didn't hear about the epidemic and the rise of it until the 2000s. And for me, I'm thinking like late 2000s, late, 2009, 2008, 2010.
Yeah, it was 2009 when I first heard somebody say they were addicted to oxycodone, and I thought, what are you talking about? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It was 2009, and then I started hearing about it more and more after that, and it started making more sense to me. But yeah, I don't know at what point people would say they were addicted. It was addiction rather than still pain management. I don't know when maybe the narrative around it started changing. And just for some background information, the definition of opioids is a class of drugs that includes the illegal drug heroin, synthetic opioids such as fentanyl, and pain relievers available legally by prescription, such as oxycodone, hydrocodone, codeine, morphine, and many others. I was also surprised to learn, because I really have been very naive about substance abuse. I did not understand that heroin was in the same classifications as oxycodone. I really saw them as two separate things. And the way that she, the author talked about them really as, one and the same. She does separate them out, but being of the same issue, that was very interesting to me as well. And I just pulled out one quote from the book. Nothing's more powerful than the morphine molecule, and once it has its hooks in you, nothing matters more. And I think it just made me think about how with great power comes great responsibility, because it's such a blessing in some ways to have powerful pain relievers, like as the book talks about for cancer patients and things like that, that predominantly had them. What a blessing to have powerful pain relievers for people who are in severe pain. But the responsibility behind that is so great that I think that's where we have the struggle as a community to figure out how to manage things like that. But
I think coming from a different generation than y'all do, I think the heroin addiction and the addiction came back with the Vietnam War and came back with the veterans of the Vietnam War, where they were addicted to heroin and stuff. When I was younger, doctors thought nothing of giving prescriptions for diet pills, pain pills like that kind of stuff. I don't know if it was the addiction like the Oxycontin is or what, but to me, that's when the addiction started, because, the veterans came back and they were prescribed all these pain pills. And then, then we have all these thousands of homeless veterans that can't function without that. So like I say, that's a whole different generation than what y'all are. But that's when it started for me, or in my mind, when the addiction started. One thing I learned from the book was that if you scrape the coating off the pills, they're stronger. Like a time release pill. I didn't know if you took that little coating off, then it would all go in your system. I didn't know that. I learned that in the book.
And it even, talked about post-war, not only the Vietnam War, but World War II, World War I, Civil War. That was those were all big turning points kind of in the history of addiction, which makes a lot of sense, honestly.
Yeah, and I agree with all that both those wars were, because those kids is what they were, 18-year-old boys sitting over there. But the Vietnam War, I think it was probably more accessible to them, and because it was manufactured over there and it was given to them. And but the turning point, I think, with drug addiction in the United States has been these wars. And the doctors fed into that at that time. I'm not saying the doctors were wrong, but that's what they did. That's like raising your children. The things that new mothers do or young mothers do now versus what I did. If you had a child that was fussy, all that, paregoric, which was a drug, is what they said, to give your children to calm them down. And I don't even think you can get that now. I have no idea. But I think it's been banned. So, that's, like I say, that's a generation thing that, it's just things are done differently now than they were when I raised my children. And that's just like, I was a teenager at the, during the Vietnam War. A lot of my school friends, those boys went off to the war. And I think back now, and I think of my father was in World War II, and he was from a little town in Marshall County. Probably never been out of Marshall County in his whole life till he went to the Philippines. And, can you imagine being 18, 19 years old and get on a plane when you've barely been in a car and fly across and be put down in some place like that? Because if he went to Paducah, it was Benton was probably the furthest place he went, because you just didn't go then. But then they jerk you up and they send you over there and just plop you down. And here's a gun, kill these people, And our veterans, I feel for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I definitely do. I can't imagine.
This is Lorraine. I agree with Vivian. It was really bad back then. I had a family member from World War II and a family member from Vietnam that came back, and one of them eventually killed herself, and from World War II, and the other one, it was an off and on thing, and there were so many of them back then. They never did get right, once they came back. I mean, they tried, but they didn't really get any help back then.
Mm-hmm.
And of course now, I mean, it's worse than ever. And I have family members that have, got addicted to these pills. And I don't think there's many people that it hasn't touched now. And it's a sad thing. It was a great book. I mean, I always, I knew what I read, but just seeing it, I think it's going to make a wonderful document for them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah,
I do too. And I know a lot of women, they would prescribe them stuff to get through the day. It's not just the teenagers. Of course, that's what kind of focus it on. But, there's a lot of adults that are hooked on it and stuff. So it's an ongoing thing.
I think that's what makes the opioid crisis so shocking in some ways, because it's not, people coming back from war that would understandably have post-traumatic stress syndrome and, a lot of mental health issues. It's, a mom that got out of the hospital after having a baby and being on pain medicine. And then when her prescription runs out, she wants more of that feeling. Or, it's, the high schoolers using it recreationally. So there is, it's the addictive component of what was not supposed to be addictive, was not supposed to.
I think that's the big point, and as has been pointed out, historically it's been around forever, but the piece that was really highlighted in this book was when the big pharma, so to speak, when they stepped in and they touted it as a drug that was just, a miracle drug, and there was no addiction potential, and it was a good pain reliever. And I think, according to, what we hear, is that it was known and it was misrepresented. And I think that's the piece that has created such a monster for us as we look at this current crisis. Not that the crisis hasn't been around historically for a long time, but that's the piece, doctors probably in the beginning were led to believe that it was a safe drug and it was a safe alternative. And there was not a lot of disclosure. And so it was abused, and then when it was not available anymore, of course, going to the street drug. And it's really created havoc in a lot of lives.
Well, and the sad thing is, Stephanie and I both have a friend that's a pharmaceutical rep, and she was explaining to me that her personal company that she works for came out with a pain medication several years ago that had a non-addictive quality. If you abused it, it actually didn't work anymore at all. Right. And the doctors wouldn't sell it. And so they eventually pulled it off the market. And so you've got this, doctors now know what an issue addiction is with Oxy, but they refuse to offer drug alternatives.
Yeah. I'd love to look into that more, April, and to see what, why, what was the reasoning behind the doctors, for not doing that.
I don't know. Pfizer's got another new pain med that I think they were supposed to bring it out this year. I don't know if they are or not, that I was being told about, that will be similar, that if you abuse it, it will not give you that high. That's why so many Oxy, as was being explained to me by this friend, so many Oxy users switch to heroin because they don't want the long-term high. They want the very short-term high. And Oxy is supposed to be a time release. Now, if you do like what's described in the book, where they separate it and take the different colors at different times, obviously that negates the time release. But the heroin gives you that instant high. And it's a whole lot cheaper when you're talking like $80 a pill versus, $15 a hit.
that's a huge difference. So it'll be interesting to see when this new drug comes out, what actually happens.
Mm-hmm. And it didn't, you know, the book didn't talk much about meth at all, but in the context of Western Kentucky, where we live, you know, I wanted to just kind of contextualize the issue a little bit for us. And the one, some of the data I found from the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, you know, I think we're not surprised that heroin is less of a problem here, with meth being more of a problem, and prescription drugs. So actually the highest drug problem here was prescription drugs. 24% of people reported that they had a family member or friend that had experienced problems with prescription drugs. And then 21% with meth. And I remember a couple years ago going to a training that talked about, it had everything to do with the highways. And that, you know, 24 was not necessarily a big drug highway, but maybe 69 was, or, you know, and so depending on, you know, where that's where heroin travels is more based on the highway. But I can see how, so I think we're lucky that heroin hasn't hit us yet as high, considering how high the prescription drug abuse was. As far as this graphic goes, I thought it was interesting.
She made reference frequently to that highway as it ran through the area, and that it definitely is a part of where it lands. And even in Illinois, looking, you know, Chicago would be heroin. Southern Illinois would be meth because it's easier to get, it's available, mm-hmm. and the highway is mm-hmm. one place or another. So that does make a big difference in terms of availability.
Yeah, when you're thinking about economic development or just like civil planning, and, you know, I've been to like chamber meetings where they're talking about growing and wanting to expand a highway. You don't really think about the unintended consequences of the possibility of that bringing new drugs into your community. You know, unless you had really looked into this issue, that's not something that you know, would necessarily be something you'd automatically think about, I don't think. Well, I could have made... Go ahead, Tony.
I was just going to say, unfortunately, when there's a will, there's a way. And, you know, we're never going to be immune from it. People are very creative in terms of accessing it. But, yeah, it definitely, it just is everywhere.
It is.
I think meth is probably bigger around here than heroin is. We're basically a rural community, and I don't know how to make meth. I just know that they stop you from buying some of the stuff, Sudafed and stuff like that. But as a rural community, we can manufacture the meth better than we can get the heroin. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Before I go into the questions that I put together, do you all have any burning questions that you want to ask?
One thing that I've really thought about as we were reading, can you hear me? Because I was not having a very good connection at first. Okay, is why they went to West Virginia. Why did they go there? Does that make sense? Why they started in, I mean, it's just such a random area. And the interesting thing is my sister used to live in that area. So all the little towns that they named, I know all those little towns, and they're just very weird, backward places that if you don't know they exist, you would never even, you know, think twice about them. So for them to go into those little towns and start this is just very bizarre to me. I don't know whether they thought they could get by with it because they were maybe, you know, uneducated or whatever they thought in their mind about these people in the communities, but it was just very odd that that's where it originated.
You know, that's interesting because I found that I had a link to that community too. And so it is, you know, it made me wonder too. Of course, they talked about factories closing and coal mines. And I really didn't see that, you know, this was the state of Virginia, but the western part of the state of Virginia. And, you know, they've specifically referenced Wise County, where I had relatives. I have a great uncle who was a physician there, and I just wonder what he knew. You know, it raised a lot of questions because, as you said, I've been to so many of those towns, and I think of the people that I knew there, and it is very, as you said, very backward. It's not in an area that you would see people doing things that were kind of on the cutting edge. In other words, so many of the things in their lifestyles were based maybe in the past as opposed to more risk-taking behaviors that were described. So it was interesting to say. I know she frequently referenced Roanoke and kind of spreading out from there, but there were very small areas and very backward mountainous areas that she described often in Wise County and Scott County, Virginia.
I wonder, was it maybe because she lived in that area and she just learned about it, and you know, it was easier for her to stay in that area.
And possibly so.
Yeah.
Karen, did you have a thought?
Yes, I had read earlier, before I read this book, that a lot of the people that were in West Virginia were given pain prescriptions because of the black lung disease and other things like that. And it was so much cheaper to get your insurance to pay for the pain prescriptions, and then you sell the pain prescriptions in order to pay your rent, in order to buy your necessities, whatever, because it was so much was given to them through either Medicaid or through coal miners' insurance. And I also have a friend that works in the judicial system in Nashville, and he said that one of the problems with oxycodone is that if they can't get that through their doctor's prescriptions, after they run out of those and they can't get them anymore, is when they switch to the heroin. And then if they can't get the heroin, then they switch to meth.
I've heard that too. One of the things I thought really interesting, and I hate to jump to the end of the book, but because we're kind of going to get there with the other questions, but in hearing the story about Ronnie, the big heroin dealer that was finally caught, and when he was working in the program through the jail at the chicken factory, that's when he started getting contacts in that community to start dealing drugs, because he couldn't get a business license to repair computers or to do any other business, start a kitchen or a restaurant. He said he liked being, I think he said, one of 5 Black people in the town. And I can't remember exactly what he said about that, but there was something about feeling like he had an exclusive market there. He didn't have the competition that he had if he went back to the city, and that people out there would pay more because it was a wealthier suburb than they would have in the city. So he liked the idea of staying out there to deal drugs instead of, going back. I can't remember if it was Baltimore that he was from, or does that ring a bell with you all? For these questions, I thought it might be nice if everybody picked one question to answer, and then we could go around and just kind of share our answers so everyone gets a chance to share. These questions are very different, but maybe one might resonate with you more than the other. The first one is the thrust of Beth Macy's exposition on the nation's opioid crisis is her belief that it didn't have to happen. It was a human-made disaster. What do you believe is responsible for creating the epidemic and keeping it going? And then the second question is, Beth Macy shares many stories of loss and grief, battling addiction, or fighting in the face of apathy. Which story did you find most inspiring, most wrenching, and most admirable? And hopefully you can read those on your screen. And I'll just go around and Jill, would you like to answer one of those for us?
Sure. Let me decide which one I want to talk about. Probably the first one, just in my opinion, from reading the information and just reading things out on the internet and the information that's already out there and kind of putting it with what we read in the book. You know, this has been going on for years and years and years and years. And I think we never got in front of it before it got so out of control. And now we're still on the back end of it. We're still behind it trying to catch up and find ways to stop it, kind of curtail it. And actually there are things that are happening now, and you know, you guys know this as well, that you know, they are putting laws out there to you can't get your prescription unless you go to the doctor so many times. And talking about the military, of course, my husband is retired and he goes to the VA hospital on a regular basis for treatments of different kinds. And they have really put the lockdown on drugs, pain medication. They really have put lots of rules in place. He can't get certain things that he got 10 years ago. Not that he was abusing it, it was something that helped him, but if he's taken a certain drug, they will not pair it with something else. And this just happened within the last 10 years. So they're really stepping up and trying to do things, but it's still, we're never going to be in front of it unless, you know, they do some very serious things, and it's always going to happen on the edge of any society. There's always going to be some things happening on the edge, but they're not going to find out about it. And I think that's how easy something can get out of control. It's just a very small something that's turned into this, like the guy you're talking about, Ron, what's his name, Ron?
Ronnie.
I read this book like a month ago, so I'm trying to remember his name. But yeah, the guy that worked in the chicken, you know, look where he started. It was so minuscule, and then it just blew up. And then all of a sudden he's got like this big, huge business. And that's how quick something like that can get out of control. And then, you know, it's like putting out a fire, you know, with the water hose. It's just gotten so big where it just kind of snuck in and took control before anybody even realized that it was happening. So that's kind of my thought on that one.
Thank you. Lorraine, what do you think?
Well, I'll take number one. I believe that she did at first. I think that probably made her curiosity. It's why she wrote this book anyway. And I think she kind of answered her own question by the time she finished it, what it was. And, you know, we can all have our opinion. I mean, just like Vivia said, I mean, it started, of course, like back in the Civil War, but it definitely was in the war, and those boys came home with it. But what we're talking about right now is the drug people and the pharmacists and the doctors. I mean, there's no doubt, and I don't know when it's going to stop. It's just like my husband just had a minor knee surgery. Well, you know, they don't even ask you. They just send you home with a prescription for it. I mean, and it was something else that it was not too long ago, and we had another prescription. We never even had to fill these things because all it's took is Tylenol and Advil for these simple things. But I mean, it is still written out for people for no reason. And so I don't know what's going to really stop it. I don't understand, you know, I'm not questioning these doctors why they do it, but why did they even, you know, hand that out to us? And when they could have just said, if you need anything, you know, or it's really upsetting. And it, you know, and no one like my family, like I have a couple people in my family that are definitely hooked on this. And to see this happen is just, it's awful. And I know those couple people, they get it so easy. I mean, it's so easy to get. And so anyway, I don't know when there's going to be an end to it. I don't know what it's going to take. So, but that's my thought.
I do wish we had a doctor among us that we could ask some of these questions to,
Yeah.
because I think that would, hearing it from that perspective would be really interesting.
You're right.
Tony, what do you think?
Oh goodness, both good questions. And just to touch on number one and some of Lorraine's comments, I think, you know, again, some of the pharmacy companies selling it as something and it became big money, and that is really what kept it going. My husband too had knee surgery not long, well, February actually, and he was prescribed Oxycontin and oxycodone. And no questions asked, 80 oxycodone. Of course, and the pharmacists filled those before surgery. So they went to our P2P pickup, but at the same time, you know, they're out there, and there was no reason for it. Especially without asking, but it was just a part of that surgery that was routine. And that's today when things are really managed much more strict. Doctors are looked at more closely when they prescribe. So that did surprise me. And that was, you know, a very reputable and competent doctor in Paducah that prescribed those. So that is still happening. Just question number two, because she allowed you to relate to the people and the families, and you could imagine that being, but Jesse's story and Tessa's story, both of those, I found myself really, really having more feeling elicited when she talked about those families and the mother, how that was for her, you know, the son who was a high school football player, and unknowingly, you know, got into this vicious cycle that led to his death. And so a lot of feeling and a lot of emotion in her writing.
Vivian, would you like to answer one of them?
To touch on number one, I think it always, bottom line, money had a lot to do with it. The pharmacy companies making quite a bit of money off of them. The doctors encouraged to prescribe these medications. I had knee surgery 15 years ago, and like them, before I left the hospital, they prescribed it for me, and I didn't know what it was or what it would do. I took very few of them, but I had to go to physical therapy, and they said, "Did you take your pain pill?" And I said, "No." They said, "Take your pain pill, take your pain pill." You know, so they encouraged that too, to take them. And I never could see it's hard for me to see what it does for you that you would want to be addicted to it. I didn't feel high. I felt sleepy. You know, I didn't get evidently what people get out of it, that they become addicted to it. I have no idea how meth feels when you take it, but I don't understand why they would want to do that. Question number two, you know, it's hard to pick out one story. I admire these mothers that have fought against it after losing their children to the addiction. I know people that have lost children to that. You know, and I admire them that they stand up and they say, you know, this is what happened to my child. So it's hard to pick one person out of all that. So.
There's definitely too many stories out there.
Yep, there is.
Karen Glass?
There we go. Now you can hear me, I think. Actually, I have something to say about both questions. The first one, I think that anytime that we have the amount of poverty that we have at this point, that if people can sell them as easily as they can get them, that's going to continue until we can have some relief from poverty. And I don't know that that's ever going to happen. And the second one is I thought about the high school itself. All of those students that were there, that those stories all came from one high school. I thought that the book would be a better book if they had just taken just the high school students' stories and put that together as a book, because they were all interconnected with each other because they all knew each other. And then they all suffered the same fate eventually, or close to that.
Makes me wonder when they do this documentary or this mini series, which part of the book they're going to focus on. Will they focus on the characters in the high school? Will they focus on the characters in treatment later on, or the big pharma side of things, litigations, or will they try to use all of it?
I think they'll probably focus on the big pharma.
Well, and some of your all's
the root of it.
Yeah, some of your all's comments really made me think that, you know, this current generation we're living in and just our mentality behind pain in general, and maybe for good reasons, we want people to be pain-free, maybe for the sake of empathy, but there is, maybe we're losing the other side of that in our society, which is that there's a purpose for pain. I think towards the end of the book, it talks about how they finally got pain off of the list. You guys know where I'm going here? The list of vital signs. And I can't recall exactly how they put it, but being able to feel pain was like a vital sign. And now that, so I think that probably there's a strong mentality that we share as a society about pain and what that means. And instead of just dealing with some pain, you know, we want to be pain-free. We want, you know, and that's been embraced, you know, very interesting, Vivian, that your physical therapist asked if you were taking your pain medicines.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's, you know, as a physical therapist, you know, I would think they would say, you know, you're going to feel pain when you do this, but that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not getting stronger, you know? I know. So that's very interesting. Very interesting.
No one wants to hurt. And a lot of it goes back, I think, you know, you go in the hospital, you have major heart surgery, you're out the next day. Insurance has a lot to do with that because they won't pay for you to stay. So you don't have the time to recuperate from surgeries. You know, they're doing total knee replacement as outpatient surgery now. You know, I stayed 2 days and wasn't sure that was enough. But, you know, they're not giving you time to recoup. So they're giving you medication so you can function when you come home as far as getting up by yourself and doing this and doing that. You know, it's just a spiraling circle of one does this and one does that and stuff like that. But so.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see, April?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any thoughts on those questions?
Well, definitely as a parent, you know, I empathize with the moms in the story and just thinking about my kids and how I would feel and what would I do. And, you know, everybody wants, they want answers and they want some sort of closure to whatever's going on. I don't think there was one story in particular that really jumped out at me. It was just kind of a culmination of all of them. And, you know, kind of piggybacking off of what some others said, the pain, I think for some, the starting on these medications is for physical pain, but then I think it morphs into something completely different. And you're talking about emotional pain. And for some reason, we've got this group of people, and I don't know if it's a specific age range or what, that they just don't want to deal with emotional pain. And being high takes that away. They don't have to deal with it. And so you have to wonder, well, what were they dealing with? What was so bad? Or was it even bad? Was it just in their heads that their lives were terrible, or that they didn't want to deal with something in particular? So I don't know. I think it's such a big question as to why, was this a human-made disaster? I mean, obviously it was a human-made disaster because you're dealing with companies that are run by people, and definitely there was money involved in it. And I think, yeah, poverty does have something to do with it, but I mean, in the end, it's greed. The dealers are greedy. The drug companies are greedy. Back in the 90s, there was a quid pro quo between drug companies and doctors. It has changed drastically in the last 20 plus years, but there was that, and there were a lot of perks to prescribing medications. So greed is always, whenever greed is involved, money's involved, things are always going to get out of control.
Very, very good point. So it's such a complex issue, so many different things involved. This was so hard for me coming up with these questions because I would think of one question and then I would think of another and another. And I felt like we could probably talk about this book forever because there are so many factors. There's, the poverty, the greed, the families of all different, socioeconomic statuses. But this has several questions in this one thought, but if you want to, if any of this sparks, a thought for you, feel free to share. So in chapter one doctor notes, I can remember telling my residents, a patient can't get hooked on 14 days worth of opioid pills. And I was absolutely wrong. So should doctors have done their own research rather than relying on the pharmaceutical companies? Who should be required to research addictive effects of medications, pharmaceutical companies or doctors? And then going off of that, what are your thoughts on the marketing strategies employed by Purdue in which they specifically sought out physicians to determine which ones would prescribe large levels of painkillers and also used gifts such as conferences at resorts free of charge, free lunches, golf trips, and additional swag? And this goes exactly off of what April was just talking about, greed and the incentive to prescribe some of these things. So, but, is it the doctor's responsibility to research it themselves if they're the one writing the prescription, or should they be able to rely on the pharmaceutical companies and take their word for it?
This is Lorraine. I think it's a shame that they can't rely on the pharmacists. I mean, they should be able to. But after this much time, and, they should now know that they can't, and maybe they should look at it a little closer on their own. And, I mean, it is strictly, you can't trust, the pharmacists, I mean, like Purdue, they were just strictly greedy. And I understand where they came from. I've been in sales all my life until I retired. And believe me, we did all of those things that they did. I mean, I wasn't a drug rep, but it works in all sales. And you do learn how to point out the ones that you don't have to do anything and you're going to get the business. And then there's ones that you have to entertain that you do have to get your business. And so as far as that, they were very good at what they did. I mean, very good. And so, and boy, I was just, as a sales rep, I was shocked at the money that the reps didn't make. I thought, wow. I mean, they really were rewarded for their efforts. And, but yeah, I mean, greed is something hard to fight. It's just, and what's going to ever stop them from doing that, I don't know. But anyway.
Just a quick thought that I had on that was that everybody at every level this is my opinion, everybody has one, I guess, but my opinion is everybody on every level should have a responsibility in this. The pharmaceutical companies, the doctors, and the patients. Once upon a time, every time a doctor handed me something, I just take it. You know, I never researched it. I never looked at the effects, and oftentimes the effects was worse than what I was experiencing. So of course, the older you get, the more experience you get with stuff like that. You learn to look things up. And so I think every level of this conversation, every person involved should have some kind of responsibility on, you know, checking out what the effects are for the medication that's floating around.
I think we as parents have a responsibility too, because we did not want our children to suffer. So your 16-year-old son hurts himself playing football, or your 16-year-old daughter hurts herself in gymnastics. You want a quick fix. You don't want them to hurt, you know. And so we were, you know, we wanted them to give them something. So we didn't question when they gave them something, because that's what we wanted them to do. Not knowing that what it could lead to, because that's what a lot of this started with. You know, this kid would hurt themselves some way or another, and then it just spiraled into the full-blown addiction. So, you know, we as parents have a responsibility to our children too.
I think it goes back to the old Ronald Reagan saying, trust but verify. The sales reps, they are only told what the company wants them to know and to relay to the doctors when they go in with their sales pitch. And so if they are not given all of the information about addiction, then of course they can't tell the doctors that. So it definitely, I think, the information that is out there, and I don't know how hard it would have been to research at that time. You know, you're talking like the infancy of the internet, and I don't think most doctors do research it. I think they take what the sales rep tells them as fact and they move forward with it.
It is hard sometimes to know too what is fact and what is created information. I think we're seeing so much of that now. And you know, the doctors, of course, are not going to do the research, but when the pharmaceutical companies do the research and they publish it as valid research, which may or may not be accurate information, it is really difficult to know what is right and what is not, even as you know, look at different information. You don't always see the same things and don't uncover sometimes the truth.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot about too, how do you test drugs, you know, brand new drugs that are coming on the market? How do you test it ethically? Because sometimes until you have a pretty widespread population that is a trial for you, you're not necessarily going to know the side effects without a trial of some sort. And I always think back to years ago, I read a study about how they first tested birth control pills in Puerto Rico, and a third of the female subjects became sterile. And, you know, and then they adjusted the pill and then they released it to the United States. But how do you know, this is a whole nother conversation for a whole nother time, but how do you ethically test drugs to see what the side effects are going to be, if it helps or not? You do have to monitor very closely, and the longer it takes, you know, the money you're losing. So I do know money drives so much of this. And it does seem like there needs to be stricter regulations for, you know, when the amount of time and the amount of research that has to be put into it before they unleash it on a widespread, you know, basis. And I'm sure there are, you know, it's just a question of what those regulations are, and were they as diligent as they could have been or needed to be.
Well, I think we saw that in the story also. You're right. you know, I can understand where the doctor at first could not know this, but I forget what that doctor's name was, Van something. You know, he realized at a point what was happening, and he did stop. You know, he started campaigning the opposite way, and so I mean, you know, you see enough of your patients coming back asking for more. That should be a little hint right there. So
that's a good point. There should have been some red flags pretty early on from doctors.
Stephanie, I have an appointment. I'm gonna have to hop off.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
Your recorded. Thank you. I enjoyed it. I'll finish watching the recorded version.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So this is still talking about kind of the evolution of the prescription with OxyContin. Cancer doctors prescribed the largest number of long-acting opioids prior to 2000, but family doctors are now the largest single group of OxyContin prescribers. What factors do you feel contributed to this change from oncology to family practitioners? And Lorraine, I think this is who you were talking about. Art Van Zee persistently asked the question, what do you consider acceptable collateral damage? Recent studies put the addiction rate among prescribed opioids at 56%, which is much higher than the addiction rate of less than 1% claimed by Purdue. Do these drugs have a place in the medical realm?
Well, again, that kind of goes back to when you look at the pharmacies claiming 1%, that's easy to believe because you assume that they're reputable and have done research, and such a difference in non-biased or impartial research studies. So it definitely is alarming that you really don't know when you read how accurate it is.
And you know, these drugs, that last question, you know, I'm sure they have a place somewheres, you know, and especially like we talked about for the cancer people. I mean, I say anything they want is fine. But just for, you know, there needs to be a stop whenever it's such a simple surgery like a knee surgery. I mean, it should be something a lot more serious before they give out these kind of drugs, and then they should monitor it.
Yeah, I think it definitely needs to be in situations that are very closely monitored, like people with cancer who are closely monitored by many doctors, not just one in particular, so that there's a checks and balances. And like other people have said, there are other alternatives to pain management besides a very heavy opioid. And when they're handing it to kids getting their wisdom teeth out, I mean, my daughter had her wisdom teeth out at 15, and they gave her oxycodone to go home with. She never took it. She took Tylenol and was fine. So there's needs to be a responsibility among the doctors that this is, we know now, highly addictive, and we need to be extremely careful about who is receiving it.
One thing I've noticed, and I agree very much that monitoring is an important piece, but some of the, especially pain management specialists, are monitoring very closely because they are being watched very closely, and very strict monitoring in terms of, you know, when they schedule an appointment, how often they have to be there. If they miss an appointment, then they lose services completely. And so then that drives them to the illicit market. Again, you know, the monitoring is a very good thing, but sometimes when it's monitored by reputable doctors and the client or the patient, for whatever reason, misses a step, missteps, then they're cut off then, and the addiction, the physiological dependence is not, and so then it drives them to other means of obtaining it because it's such a desperate need. But again, monitoring is important and accountability by doctors, but sometimes then they lose those people and it doesn't mean they stop using just because they're not going back to the doctor that's prescribing.
I think so many doctors have just become drive-through services too, where they're pumping through so many patients in a day that they cannot give really good undivided attention to the person that's in front of them. And there didn't seem to be questions asked, while the epidemic was rising as to, well, why are you a year out of surgery still relying on these pain medications, and what more could be going on, and maybe involving psychiatry or psychology therapy of some sort in it, and really have some evaluation done. It was just kind of like, oh, you're in pain, well, here's another script, go on, have a good day. And then it wasn't until the crackdown started where they were really monitoring doctors' prescriptions and people's social security numbers for receiving opioids that everybody kind of, dug their heels in and really started paying attention to it. So I think doctors, there's just so much responsibility on all levels. It's so hard to just point the finger and say, well, they're completely at fault and they're completely at fault. And should we still be prescribing this medication?
I think that's a great point. And there is so many different levels to it, and I've noticed personally over the last 10 years, just the burden of being a doctor now. I mean, that at one time that might have been a job a lot of people would have wanted to grow up to be a doctor. And now it seems like such a hard job. They do have such a huge patient load. And anymore, if I go to the doctor, 9 out of 10 times, I'm going to see the PA. I'm not going to see the doctor. And I know some people talk about seeing these hospitalist doctors sometimes. And because their patient load is so large, they don't always see a primary doctor, which is, it might be good and bad. April, you were talking about the checks and balances of multiple doctors, but sometimes in seeing multiple doctors, the information's not all coming back to the same place either. Where, if you were able to figure out how to hop to different doctors and get the same prescription for things and not be caught, I think there was a time people could get away with that more. And I think they're really trying to figure that out a little better to prevent that from happening. But I think it still can happen because you can go to so many different places. There's a lot of responsibility, a lot of burden of responsibility on a lot of levels. So turning the conversation a little bit into recovery, what did you all know about recovery before reading Dopesick? And what have you learned since? They talked about a lot of different methods to treatment and also just the reality of going through treatment. We saw several different stories. And in that, some of the protocols are controversial, such as the medication-assisted treatment, the abstinence-based programs, or the needle exchange programs. Do you believe that there was a right way to treat addiction? And then once users get into treatment, how successful is it? What makes recovery so difficult? And what are some of the barriers? So just what are your thoughts on recovery and some of the things that they talked about?
Well, this is Lorraine. I've never, of course, been in a treatment, but I do know people that have been. And I'll have to say that the people that I know that's been, they've been okay for a little while when they get out, but it seems like they always go back. So I don't know what they're doing in these places. I know a lot of times sometimes these people get in trouble and they're assigned to maybe 30 days or, something like, well, that's not going to do it. And even the 90 days sometimes don't work. But I know they're overcrowded. And I honestly can't say if the treatments that are the people that are given the treatments are if there's good places or bad places, because I have yet heard of one that I know of that where the recovery has ever worked. I mean, it's always, these people have been most of them have been 2 or 3 times, and they still got a problem. So I know very little about that, and I didn't see any really good answer in the book myself about that. And the people they talked about, none of them really got any help,
I kind of agree with Lorraine about, well, one thing, I think it's in yourself to whether you recover or not. And of course, I'm a big faith believer, so I thank God if, can help you do that. But on the other hand, with the foster children that I've been dealing with for years now, mother has been off and on meth addicted, having babies, meth addicted and all that. She's clean now. She says, I don't know because I'm not around her now, that she's been clean for almost a year, but she was incarcerated for 9 months of that year. So, and she wants to get back in contact with her kids who she's lost custody of, they've been taken from her. But, it's like I was talking to somebody else that's involved in the case, and I said, it's too soon. When I first came in the case, she was clean, supposedly, but then she's back and forth. I don't think she should see her kids right now until she proves that she could stay clean. She says she's going to church. She's told that story to me before. So, I don't know what the answer to all that is. I'm kind of a naysayer in some of that stuff because I've seen where it hasn't worked and what these kids have been through, and I don't want them to have to face that again. And so I don't know, one of the children's over 18, so I'm not involved with her anymore. There's nothing I can do about it. If she ends up back with mother, what can I do? But, so I don't know, I don't know where a good place is or what you should do. I think you should continue counseling. I think that's one thing that they do. They get out and they say, oh, been 2 weeks. I'm good. I don't have to go anymore, And then the next thing you know, and back to doctors and stuff, maybe they go to the doctor and they've got some little issue. They pulled a muscle or they did this or did that. The doctor will give them some pain pills, which then leads on down the line. So, I don't know what the answer is.
I am with you, Vivian, and also Lorraine. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that recovery is a process. And as Lorraine pointed out, it's very, very rare that someone goes to rehab one time and they are recovered, no longer abusing whatever their drug of choice is. Medication-assisted treatment is probably the best practice belief now. And so, we're seeing all the Suboxone and the different clinics. People are learning to abuse that. So really, really have to be at that readiness level. And generally it takes, I always want to believe there's hope, but generally it doesn't take the first time or the second time, and it is a long process. I participated in a program that's called Rides to Recovery. So I took a young man, 38-year-old, last week to rehab. It wasn't his first rodeo. He'd been many times before. I asked him what was, and meth is his drug of choice. Said, what's going to be different this time? He said, I'm ready. I want to believe he's ready, but again, that remains to be seen. But the piece that was going to be different was he was going to go and I'll call it a halfway house. He's going to go to housing afterwards. He's not going to return to this community. He's not going to return to the places, the people, the events that kind of supported his use. And he feels like he's motivated this time, but we'll see. And I'm hoping he continues in the program now, and then he'll go to a halfway house at Granite City upon discharge. And that's going to be the piece that's different for him now, but he thinks his readiness level is different. And I just am going to say one other thing. And this is really a big concern of mine, is when I interact or have interactions with folks who are really battling. I would say, and not anything based on fact, but probably 95 to 99% of them were started on Adderall or psychostimulants as children. And this young man was too. He said, that he was prescribed Adderall as a kid, and it just went from one amphetamine to another. His meth is his drug of choice now, started using at 18. So it's really difficult to say what is the most effective treatment. There are still many treatment programs that believe in abstinence, but it seems like that I'm hearing that the most successful programs are the medication-assisted treatment. But again, that's when the drugs that are prescribed are not abused, and they can be abused, and they've learned how to do it, and they can be injected and snorted and all kinds of things that make them act differently than their intended physiological response. So it's a hard question, and we got to believe there's hope, especially for these parents of so many of our children. But it sure doesn't happen because they go to rehab once.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there is a right way to treat addiction. I think it's like people who also are dealing with depression and other issues, that you have to find the treatment that works best for the person. And it's going to be so individualized, and it is going to take a lot of time. And I think when you're in treatment, you're in such a bubble. You don't have the stresses of life. You're told what to do. You're told where to go. You're told what time to do it. And then you get out in the world, out of treatment, and then the stress of life happens. You either have kids you have to deal with, or you get a job, things like that, and you have to navigate that. It goes back to what I said earlier about people becoming addicted initially because of physical pain, but then it turns into a masking of emotional pain, and it's digging down into what that is, and people being honest about what that is and why they need that drug, and what that drug is doing for them that they don't want to deal with.
Tony, I'm glad you brought up the thought about the Adderall, because I think that's a huge thing too. And she does reference that several times. But what we prescribe to kids is, it's amazing to me. Like April was saying, even after her daughter had her wisdom teeth out. And there's a huge societal stigma around do whatever you have to do so that your kids are happy and healthy and succeeding in school. If they're being too hyperactive, give them pain so they succeed more, and instead of thinking about the long-term effects. But no one has really mentioned the needle exchange program. To me, when I read about the medication assisted treatment, I had this sense of relief, like, wow, that could really work for some people. When I read about the needle exchange program, I definitely understand the psychology behind it, but I had that just gut feeling of, oh man, that's really hard for me to accept, because it feels like enabling. And my personal history is not so much with drug addiction, but with dealing with domestic violence situations. And, in that situation with my sister, people would ask me all the time, is she on drugs? She has to be on drugs, because it's the same scenario where you can't understand why she wouldn't leave, and why she'd go into a domestic violence shelter and then go back to him, and back into a domestic violence shelter and then back with him, just like in treatment programs. And everybody would tell me she has to be on drugs too. And I would say, no, she really isn't. But it is a very similar parallel.
It's like a drug.
Yes, it's like a drug. It's an addiction to something else other than drugs. And people would always say, when it came into the context of domestic violence, that it takes 7 to 9 times of leaving before you leave for good. And that was the encouragement people would give us for 12 years, keep on, don't give up, because this is her 5th shelter. Just keep on going. And now it's her 12th shelter. And then it's her, don't give up, because it takes that many times. And so, I can relate to, I guess, family members who have, loved ones with drug addiction, because there's that really fine line between not wanting to enable them, but not wanting to give up on them either, because it's such a long process, and this might be the time. This might be the time that they get away or that they get better. And so what do you all feel about that balance between enabling and giving them that helping hand, in either in the context of the needle exchanges or in giving them the rides to treatment, or, that was talked about in the story a little bit. What do you all feel about that?
It's a hard question, because, it's a hard balance there. You don't want to not give them the help they need, but then you don't want to enable them either. So that's a really hard question and each situation's different.
I think too, with the needle exchange, it's a harm reduction outlook there, and they're going to get the needles, the dirty needles they'll use and reuse. So I think that's a little bit of the thought goes there, even though it can be seen as enabling. But if they're making the choice to use, at least we know they are not going to have Hep C or some of the other diseases that can come from the dirty needles and the shared needles. So I'm not aware if there are needle exchanges active in this area now, but it is something, especially in larger metropolitan areas, where it's readily available. Kind of, yeah.
This is Lorraine. I have 2 friends that have children that they're up in their 30s now, and they've been, in both cases, their children have their child. They each got one child, and they've been, ever since they were teenagers, they've been off and on, and they're both of these people are in their 30s. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to one yesterday, and the son had got in trouble again. And it's so sad to listen to these parents that, they definitely have, both of them have been enablers. There's no maybe about that, helping them. But it just so sad yesterday, every time I hear this story, it's a repeat about, I really think this time it is going, I think he really understands what he's done. I think this is it. And I can't really tell you how many, I don't even have an answer anymore. I just nod and, hope so. But as a parent, and I'm not a parent, and so I don't understand it. And I came home and told my husband about it, and he is a parent, and he said, it's so hard. He's never had that problem, but he said, I can't imagine not helping your own child. And so it's just really sad. I don't know anything about needle exchanges. Both of these situations, one of them is alcohol and the other one is drugs, just, pills and stuff. And so I could really relate to these people in the book. And because I don't think as a parent you ever give up, and you really just don't know what to do. And I know it's hard for them to walk away. And so it's just really sad all around.
I do have a sibling. I grew up with a sibling with addiction problems. And I mean, my parents threw everything at the wall to try to fix him. And the problem was, every facility he went into, he learned more bad behaviors from everybody else that was in there. So that is one of the major pitfalls of treatment. Even at 47 years old, I walked away 20 years ago, and I said, I'm done. I'm tired of being abused and neglected, but I'm a sibling. I'm not a parent. My parents still refuse to walk away, and he's 47 years old. He just turned 48. So they're still always hopeful, but they don't, it's at a distance at this point, and it's been at a distance for some time. It's really difficult. You don't want to watch your child hurt themselves. But at the same time, like it's been said, you hope that every time they go for treatment, that'll be the one time that it takes, and you maintain that hope. And then, I watch my mom and dad fall apart when it doesn't. And then the next time, this will be it. He's saying all the right things. And, he has his coming to Jesus moment. And then within 6 months to a year, it all falls apart. So it's such an up and down battle. And it's such a fine line of how much do you help, how much do you encourage, and how much are you enabling?
I have a really hard time when there's not just a black and white answer of what I'm supposed to do next. And I think this question and this theme, and I think we all feel this way. It's real. This is probably, to me, the hardest part of it, especially being in the helping profession. We are all here in the helping profession, and so we want to help, but we don't want to enable. To me, part of it goes back to the importance of work. And I feel like, and this is kind of circling it back to what we talked about at the beginning, but so many jobs and labor jobs being offshored, and so many industries shutting down, making it hard to find work that people really can use their skills in and be valuable. Not only just in communities where industries have left, but also those who are incarcerated and coming out of that. Maybe for some of these kids who coming out of high school in the suburbs, being handed things on a silver platter and going to parties instead of working. I feel like work, and really hard, valuable work, is a big component of our society that's missing. That opens the door for drug use. And it's not the case for everybody. I think for a lot of people, it's very complex. It's mental health issues on top of, a lot of different things. But even in recovery, I feel like the barriers to finding a really good job, a job that they care about, and the job that they want to have, being able to choose what you do. Nobody wants to work fast food, but they do because that's the only place that will employ them. So I think that's a huge missing component. And I know there's a lot of programs that are trying to help with that, and trade programs that are trying to come up. And I hope we see more of that also. We got about a half an hour left, so I have a few more questions. Spencer's story was one that I really liked. He was the one that got out of jail and then kind of started teaching others. And here's a quote from that as Spencer, that it was not in his best interest to get high. It took time in jail and a friend dying before he could decide he wanted to change. So for him, the magic number was 15, but it wasn't just rehab, he was incarcerated. And then I believe he was a friend of Jesse, I think, if that's correct. Much is discussed about the criminal aspect of addiction and law enforcement arrests, but is this a law enforcement issue? Are prisons where addicts belong? Would you advocate for alternative penalties, the use of drug court or court order treatment, as opposed to the traditional criminal justice process for drug addicts and dealers?
I don't think prison's always the answer. But there again, we go back to our prison systems and our counseling systems and all that are so overwhelmed that you can't, you don't have a place for everybody. I think that drug dealers that deal to children, I think they should probably go to prison. But the children that get picked up, it seems like there should be something else for them so that they can work on that, because you stick them in with the prison system, and as much as we don't, and y'all probably don't believe this, but there are people that are bad. They are beyond redemption. They're bad. And you take a 20, 25, 30-year-old person that was raised in the suburbs and all that, and they don't know how to handle these bad people that would just soon, give you drugs or do whatever. So there should be some alternative out there, but I don't know what it could be,
I agree completely with Vivian. Exactly what she said. I mean, and I don't think like these kids going to jail, which is a terrible place to go and to be with such bad people. But I know that our system can't afford anything else. But there should be a special place that they could go, and them just sitting in there and not getting help while they're there is not working at all. So, but what the answer is, I don't know.
I think our legal system has been too black and white in a lot of these topics. It's too, well, if you do this, then this is the punishment. If you do this, then this is the punishment. And there's so much gray in these areas. And I don't believe that jail is the best place for a drug addict. I do believe it is the best place for a drug dealer. I think statistics show that most drug dealers are not users. It goes back to greed. There's a lot of money to be made. And so I do believe in stiff penalties for drug dealers. But as far as addicts being in jail, no, I have a really hard time with that. And then you get into more gray area. Well, what if they committed a crime while they were high? And then how do you deal with that? And I think we've applied too much cut and dry. And if you do this, then this is the punishment. And I think the topic is so much broader than that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your thoughts, April, as far as dealers and addicts and that. I think it's really sad for those that are the in-between. I think there were several of those situations where the addict became the dealer because that was their only way to get money and to get enough for themselves also. And I think those are the ones, to me, that would be the hardest to try to figure out. If they were caught, what do you do with them? It does seem to me that, like there's a drug court, there should be a drug jail, or a treatment type, facility that was, very specialized for drug crimes. And I'm sure there's programs out there. And one thing I want to add to our future list of Meet Our Partners trainings for CASA is to have someone from drug court talk to us, because I have heard really great things about drug court, but I'd love to know more of the ins and outs of how that works, because it does seem to be a better system than, when they get put in the traditional criminal justice track of things. What Not sure if Tony's trying to talk. She froze on my end. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question, and hopefully she'll be able to jump back on with us. We've got just a couple more questions here. Timeline illustrates that it began when whole swaths of the country, especially the upper Midwest, were gutted as industries moved overseas and China exported its excess capacity to the United States. In short, despair and hopelessness and unemployment represent a fertile ground for those seeking the euphoric escape of opioids. I think that might be either a quote from the book or a quote from a summary. Cocaine and crack started in the big cities and spread throughout the countryside. What factors do you believe allowed the opioid epidemic to begin in the exact opposite manner? Do you believe offshoring industries is a major factor? And I just thought that question in general was very interesting. Why is it that it started in the countryside and first? And I know Jill asked that at the very beginning too. And we talked a little bit about that and about prescriptions being, I think Karen said, prescriptions being given to the coal miners more in that region, which I thought was very interesting. Do you have any other thoughts on why it spread in an opposite manner as crack and cocaine did?
Do you think maybe they went, it kind of started where they thought there was pain? I mean, where there was people that were working labor and would need pain pills, and things like that. And it was just, I guess they went to the small towns and they were able, if they could accomplish that and it could spread there, then I don't know. It might have seemed like it was easier to start it there instead of starting in a big city where it may have got stopped, easier than doing, dealing with the people that, I don't know. I have no idea, except maybe they could see that country people may had the pain, especially these coal miners, and it's a great question. So I'd like to know too.
Well, I think, maybe country doctors don't have the resources that big city doctors do, so that if you're in a little coal mining town, which to us, that means that it's a poorer town, there's not as many resources and stuff, and the doctor there, that's all he knew to do was, maybe give them a prescription. Safety was not the issue back a few years ago as it is now. More people were getting hurt, and there were not the laws on how long you could work or what you could do and stuff like that. So I think that has a lot to do with that. The doctors just didn't have the resources in the smaller towns, and so they just prescribed a medication.
I think that's a tough question to answer because, I mean, my husband's family is from Eastern Kentucky. Their dad, my husband's grandfather, was a coal miner. I don't know. I don't know why that area seemed to gravitate towards that. You know, certainly there is a lot of physical pain in those jobs. They are very manually demanding. Craig's grandfather had black lung. I don't know if it's that. I don't know if it's, I always ask Craig, why don't people leave? Why do they stay there? Is it because, you know, this is the land of my people? This is the land of my family. There's nothing there. There's no hope for younger generations. And so they just get caught in these cycles of poverty and drug abuse. And it's crazy to me. I don't know what the answer is. It's just a crazy concept.
I'm like you, April. I would have asked those same questions, and I haven't spent very much time out there. I'm not very familiar with that culture, but I can, because my instinct too would be, why wouldn't you leave and go somewhere else? But I could definitely see how the generational cycles would just keep continuing and spiraling there. So statistics are provided within the book that 24% of Lee County high school juniors reported trying OxyContin. So like 1 in every 4 high schooler. 9% of the county's 7th graders had tried it. So how do we seek to educate our children? What age should this begin? And we don't really have to go into the next question because we kind of already did, but do you believe there's a correlation between the rise in ADHD diagnosis and the rise of drug addiction? That may play into your answer to, you know, how do we seek to educate our children or change the systems to help to stop this at an earlier age?
Doctors are not as, pediatricians aren't as fast to prescribe the medication as they was, say, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. There's one doctor in town, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, if you want to get your kid put on one of these medications, go to this certain doctor. He'll do it for you. You know, so it's just like with, you know, the drug addiction, you know where to go. And I think it has a big, you know, there for a while, there was a big percentage of kids that were on the, that were diagnosed with ADD and all this stuff. And teachers are overwhelmed too. I'm not slamming any teachers whatsoever. Having drove a special needs bus for years, I saw the, you know, how the medicine calmed them down and stuff. You pick them up, they're jumping up and off the walls. They've just had their medication. By the time you get them to school, they're calm so that when they could go in. Teachers have a big job to do now. You know, it's not just with teaching, it's with the social environment and stuff like that. So teachers, I'm not in the school system anymore, so I don't really know what they do. Teachers don't discourage you putting your kid on those kind of medications. They may now, they didn't then. I can't say what they do now, and I can't say whether they're right or wrong either. Having seen both sides of it, because sometimes by the time I would get the child to school, I'd think, oh my gosh, you know, how could they put up with it? It would have been hard to put up with it all day. So yes, I think it has a real correlation with, I think that all goes into then when they're teenagers and the other addictions and all that. I certainly do.
Looking at that question about when do we seek education for children and what age, I think now, as soon as you believe that your child understands, about it, which would be an early age, I think you should start talking about it. I believe at one time that a lot of families probably didn't want to talk about it because, that wasn't going to happen in their family. of course, and but it happens to all families now. And I think the earlier you can talk about it to your child and make them aware of what they can expect in school, because there's a lot of kids that are older kids that are selling it to other kids in school. And so I think they need to know as much as they can, as soon as they can. And I think a lot of these, like the 24% that are juniors, and probably in a lot of those 9% that they're younger, could be the siblings of those juniors. And, but yes, I believe that as soon as a child can understand, I think they ought to be aware of it.
You know, when I read that in the book about kids with ADHD diagnosis having a propensity for drug addiction, that was my brother. He was diagnosed in the late 70s, early 80s with ADHD. And I mean, my parents had to jump through hoops at that time to get him on medication. And then, of course, he ended up having a drug problem. So I'd never heard that before. I thought that was very interesting. I'd love to do some more research on it. But, you know, the numbers with the juniors in high school, I can tell you from personal experience, my middle daughter just graduated high school. Both of my girls went to Tillman. 9 times out of 10, when there was a drug bust at Tillman, it was a wealthy, upper middle class, white kid. And several times it was a doctor's kid that was the one with the drugs. And that junior number, the pressure that is on these kids to excel and do well and be the best, and everything hinges on you going to college, it's unbelievable. I mean, we watched our kids break down from time to time because of it. And luckily neither one of them had the kind of personalities to be involved in drugs, but they certainly knew of kids that did drugs. It's crazy right now. It's not the poverty that you think of all the time that's selling and or using. A lot of time it's for performance, and it's the pressure, and it's the release for them to escape for a little while.
Well, that's like, not the drug. I agree completely with you, but the physical abuse, some kids that come in, you would be surprised at the families they come from, that there are the doctors, the lawyers, the upper society, that these kids suffer. You think when you say a kid's been physically abused, they come from, the lower class, but that's not always so, and it's not so about the ones that get busted for the drugs. Of course, lots of times you don't hear that, but I agree with you.
I'll never forget the implicit bias training we did last summer with Pastor Palmer. He had us write on a piece of paper the first thoughts or word that came to our mind when he mentioned things. And one of his words was a drug dealer. And you were supposed to, what's the first image of a drug dealer that you think of? And, nobody put a doctor, though doctors are drug dealers, maybe legally, sometimes maybe illegally sometimes, but that has really made an impression on me also, to think that, as a society, if we want to come into the school with a drug program, are we going to target the honors classes to talk to them first? Or are we going to talk to the remedial classes? Who are we going to prioritize in sharing that information with? And I think our bias is a big factor in that.
Yeah, we're biased towards the lower class, the kids like that. If it's you base it on where a child lives in a certain area, oh well, they're probably like that. There's so many factors that I don't know if they still have the DARE program or not. I don't know, because I don't have kids in elementary school or grandkids. But the DARE program, I think, is a good thing. But the guy that did the DARE program back when I was driving a bus, look where he is now, because that's what John Parks was. He was the DARE cop that went to all the schools. All the kids loved him. He was there all the time. And I probably shouldn't say that about him, but I think that's public knowledge that he was the DARE cop. And where's he at now? He was the fishing coach. So it's hard to judge, and you shouldn't judge him either. He evidently has problems, but so then a kid says, well, look who told me not to take drugs. Look what he's doing. Mm-hmm. Kids remember things like that, and they're very influenced by things like that. But
I did DARE too. I thought it was a really good program, and it worked for me. I don't think it works for everybody, but I can definitely remember being in 4th grade and thinking to my 4th grade self, oh, I never want to do drugs. That sounds horrible, And so I don't think elementary school, or at least upper elementary school, is too young to start teaching kids the effects of drug abuse, so that they can start getting it in their minds. This is a bad thing. And my son's only in 2nd grade. We haven't seen anything on drug abuse yet, but I hope that it's still in the schools. And, I think we had officer friendly when I was a kid. And, there's always going to be those bad apples in any group that's looking to abuse the system, will come out later. But hopefully if there's safety measures in place, the information is still getting out to the kids. And I don't think we need to rely solely on our parents to teach their kids. I think that the community does have a responsibility to talk about that.
In Massac County, during Red Ribbon Week this year, we did, actually the 2nd time ever, but an essay contest for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And it was just, I don't even know the word to use, the knowledge and the experiences that they were reflecting. And their essays were so genuine.
Okay, so did we lose Steph and Tony now?
I think so.
Well, while we're waiting for everybody to reconnect, I have been really quiet this whole time, but
yeah, I forgot you were there.
But I know that one thing about what age should we begin? About a year ago, we put Braden on Singular for allergies, and we recently found out, he had a very horrible 4th grade year, and his mood drastically changed. He was not sleeping through the night, even though he had started sleeping through the night pretty much straight home from the hospital. And we just had one issue after another. And over the summer, my husband was like, my allergy medicine isn't working. I think I'm going to take some of Braden Singular, and I want to look and see what it says about it. So he pulled it up, and the very first thing talked about a new study that had came out, and that what kind of psychosis side effects were being linked to it. And we immediately called the pediatrician and went in, and they took us off of it. And the amount of difference in my child is night and day. And to me, it's just I never really considered allergy medicine a drug, even though I mean, I know it's a prescription, but it still just didn't really seem to connect to me the same as another kind of drug. But the difference in Braden's irritability and way he wants to cooperate now, it's just night and day difference in the amount of time that we've been off of it. And I just feel like it just shows you that, you know, it's never too early to research and find out, you know, different things that are affecting our kids. And I think, gosh, you know, Singular is such an easy thing that, you know, so many kids are on, so many adults are on it. And it just shows you how easy, in my opinion, it is that, you know, something that you thought was completely harmless had very severe, harmful side effects. And so, believe me, we had a very long talk with our child about drugs and how they can affect you. And I feel like the sooner you can have those conversations, by far the better. And I mean, you're going to see those same kind of things with ADHD drugs. You know, all of a sudden the kids become sleepy or stop eating, or they have lots and lots of other things that go along with that. So I just wanted to pop in there and say that, because I feel like as a community, we need to know those things. I don't think people talk about, you know, that enough. So hello, welcome back, Steph.
Thanks for jumping in. I feel like it's a miracle that my internet has held out this whole time, and it's thundering in the background. So hopefully,
I think everybody freezing up. I think it's that. And I'm going to need to get off. Before I get off, Jen, are you doing the Optima training tomorrow?
I'm on both. I'm going to be on tonight and tomorrow.
Okay, they just called and changed the doctor's appointment I had to 9:45. I should be back by 11. I hope to be back by 11, but if I'm a little late, I was just going to tell you that. I'm sorry to interrupt and put that in there.
That's okay. It's going to be recorded too. So if you miss the beginning of it, you can always watch it later or just talk it through with your supervisor, because you'll probably catch on to it really quick. So.
Okay.
Yep. Stephanie, am I the only one being kicked off?
I think you're the only one that's like really getting totally kicked off. My connection's been spotty, but still, it's kind of, it stabilizes itself after a minute.
Okay, well, I've had it happen twice, but I'm on again for right now.
Did you want to say anything, Tony? Did you get cut off?
No, I probably missed some of the information, and I was talking when I cut off, so I really don't know where I ended. I think I'm fine.
That's okay. Well, we'll wrap up anyway. So we were on the last question anyway. So what was your thoughts about whether Dopesick ended on a note of hope or a note of despair for you? How do you feel after reading that book? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Do you feel like we're going to find the solutions that we need, or just how are you feeling after reading that book?
Well, I don't feel any hope. I guess it was just pretty much facts. Interesting to know all those facts, but I don't see, on a personal basis and friends and family, I don't really feel, that it gave me any hope. I definitely hope that there is a solution someday that, it's very disappointing sometimes to watch what we will spend money on in this country. And, this is probably one of the most serious problems, along with, of course, abuse and other things that we do spend money on. It's heartbreaking to see when we've got so many people that need help, so.
And Lorraine, talking about the cost of things, that could be a whole nother discussion that we talk about, the cost of treatment and how huge of a barrier that was for so many people. And then wishing that more nonprofit, you know, free treatment centers would become available, or that Medicaid, you know, the insurance would cover it, or, you know, what would that look like? You know, what kind of solutions might be out there? Unfortunately, we go full circle back to the issue of greed. And would there ever be a solution? It would require some self-sacrifice, probably of greed in one hand, in order to provide things more accessibly, you know, for drug addicts. So,
Yes, I agree.
Tony, how are you feeling after reading the book?
Well, I think probably after reading the book, it just kind of reiterated things that were probably a part of my knowledge base. So there was not a lot of new information. I want to stay optimistic. I want to believe there's hope, because I don't think without hope we can go forward. But this is a long and hard road, yes. The book, it was good to see it and kind of to hear again, and just to know, you know, that it's widespread and it's everywhere, because sometimes we focus on our small area and know that it is a problem. But I do have hope and optimism. And one thing which just is probably not specific to us, but definitely we're feeling it in Massac County, because Illinois, you know, recreational marijuana. And we did a youth survey, substance use survey, and already we're seeing changes in attitudes toward drugs in general. And that's real frightening to me. But that's something as a state that we're dealing with it. In Kentucky, you're not yet, but we're so close that, you know, it definitely is going to impact all of us. So overall optimism, but see so many barriers. And treatment is so very difficult to get into. There's waiting lists. You know, an individual can be ready for treatment, but a week, a month, a year waiting to get in it's very difficult to go forward once that readiness point is reached. But optimistic. But we got to change the things that aren't working.
April, how did you feel after reading the book?
Okay, finally, I got my phone unmuted. In some ways optimistic, but in so many other ways, very sad, very let down. I do think that the author did a wonderful job of not editorializing, that she really kept it fact-based. And I think that's so hard for so many authors, because they want to constantly interject, well, I think this and I think that. But she really had her numbers, she had the facts. And for me, that's a big deal. I want to see the facts. Going back, I'm going to play a little bit of a conspiracy theory here. I just wonder how much effort will actually be put into treatment and therapy and all that, because you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar system. And if we fix opioid addiction, where is that going to leave so many other businesses and companies? And it's kind of like to find a cure for cancer. There's so much money in finding a cure. Will they ever actually do it? And so I think anytime you're going to have bureaucrats involved and government involved and people who, going back to greed, are in it for money, is it ever going to be solved?
Yeah, very, very good. I know, a very good point. And I kind of feel the same way. For me, I was hopeful when I read about the medication-assisted treatment, and happy to hear that that's becoming more acceptable, especially in some of the residential programs that have been abstinence-based. I'm a little hopeful that some of those maybe conservative and liberal ways of thinking about treatment can come together and work for the best interest of the patient. But I definitely had a lot of despair also. It was very much of a roller coaster for those who are already stuck in the cycle. And I guess because my kids are so young, I come out of this with this heightened fear, you know, that I'm going to be lecturing my kids, you know, all the time, and not letting them go to parties, not letting them go to sleepovers, you know, just this heightened fear. You know, and I do hope that, you know, just a feeling, I guess, of motivation that I hope other parents and community members at large will share the same preventative, you know, discretion to be able to try to keep our kids and acknowledge that it can happen to you. You know, nobody is immune from this. Doesn't matter if you were the football star or if you were, you know, the kid in the corner who got bullied with no friends. It doesn't matter. It can happen to anybody. I really hope that we can hear the voices of the doctors more. I just think that's one of the pieces that I come feeling like they kind of being this middleman, but I hope that they can, and some did, you know, like Van Zee, you know, acknowledged it and turned around quickly. But I hope that, you know, we can see more and more doctors rising where they're not just going through the motions of their profession, but actually taking responsibility, you know, for that and being very conscientious. That's I guess, I'm hopeful about that, though that might be a little naive. So it was a roller coaster book. I thought at the beginning, it was hard for me to follow, I think the first couple of chapters, but then I really was able to get into it. And looking back, I think it was a very, very well done book and gave a really good big picture, and then also very heartfelt personal stories at the same time. So it was good. Any other last thoughts before we leave? Or any other calls to action for any of us? Or I think what you all do with CASA, it's helping because, you know, whatever we do to stop cycles in families is huge. And we have seen just this year, we've seen several of our kids returned home to parents who went through drug treatment. I can think of one that happened very recently. And the dad went through treatment, has custody of his son, and they're thriving. And he has a lot of support from his family. So, you know, I'm just thinking of him constantly and hoping that it sticks. But definitely hanging on to those success stories is important, for me at least, to not get into that spiral of hopelessness and keep thinking about, you know, the ones that we do see them go through treatment and help. So, well, I won't take up any more of your time. I know you spent a lot of time reading the book and then a couple hours here, though I feel like there's so many things we could keep talking about. I'm glad that you all enjoyed it and were able to get a lot out of it. And I think we're going to do another book club probably in another 6 to 8 weeks. And Jill, who was on the call earlier, who's our education coordinator, she's probably going to lead one on The Deepest Well, which is about the ACEs study. So if that's something that interests you, we'll be putting something out about that soon. And if you have any other book suggestions for book clubs you might want to do or topics you'd want to study, let us know, because I think I've really enjoyed doing the book club because it gives us a deeper understanding of an issue more than just a 1 hour or 2 hour training. I feel like we're really investing a lot of time in it. So it's been helpful for me at least. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed it as well. So thank you for being a part of it. If you want to discuss any more, feel free to reach out.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.